my name is Brittany Boone, and this is my research proposal for LIBS 300. As you may already know, I have chosen to do my research topic on mass incarceration, and I have chosen to do so because of the enormous effects on the Black community, as well as our criminal justice system and society as a whole. So the purpose of this study will be to have a better understanding of why Black people are the main source and target of mass incarceration. So hopefully at the end of the study we have a better understanding of why that is. I would also like to learn what it is that is fueling mass incarceration. So whether that be money, whether that be politics, whether that be our current legislation, I hope to get a better understanding of the driving force behind mass incarceration. And with that, we will also learn how such a phenomena has been able to sustain itself for so long. So we see mass incarceration uprising in the 1970s. With President Nixon. And since then, mass incarceration has exponentially grown in its numbers of Black men who are charged, convicted, and then inevitably incarcerated. So, this study is significant because it could provide results that could potentially shape and mold how our legislators create legislation, specifically legislation regarding our current drug laws and how those drugs are prosecuted, mandatory sentencing laws. These have been specific legislation that help to incarcerate Black men at much higher numbers than any other race in America. This study could also influence more and more scholarly literature to help provide to the public regarding mass incarceration. So I hope that my research will be used and will be considered a standard for other scholarly researchers and or authors to provide more information regarding this topic. All right, so this study will be limited by race. So both white and Black people will be studied throughout my research, and they will be observed. And additionally, all research will be limited by the perception of the researcher, in this case, who will be me. All right. So I, as a researcher, relied heavily on a lot of literature regarding mass incarceration, in particular the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Miss Michelle Alexander. So her book, The New Jim Crow, it is a stunning account of the rebirth of a caste-like system in the United States. So one that has resulted in millions of African Americans locked behind bars and then relegated to a permanent second class. So for example, Miss Michelle Alexander gives the example of the war on drugs, which was a political campaign funded and executed by President Ronald Reagan. And how its infiltration has systematically incarcerated, in particular, Black men at an astronomical rate. So, just for example, 750 people are in prison for every 100,000 adults or children in America. So, not necessarily looking at Greensboro, but if we were looking at a major city, because of the drug war, as many as 80% of young African American men now have a criminal record. And in the study phase of mass incarceration, it wasn't limited by just the incarceration aspect. So I did definitely take into account conviction rates, in comparison to incarceration rates, in comparison to the rate of just being simply charged with a crime. So all those aspects will be taken into consideration throughout my research. All right, so let's see. The subjects that I will be studying are going to be both black and white males. So in order to have a comparison group, will be definitely surveying and observing white males as well, not only black males, because I need a gauge. I have to have something to compare. So there will be 2 age groups that will be studied for both races. So there will be 2 groups for black men, 2 groups for white men. The age groups are going to be between 25 and 40 and 24 and 17 for both. So let's see. 100 men for each age group and race for a total of 100 people being studied. So my total population will be 400 people, 200 representing on both sides of black and white, and then 2 per age group. I intend on collecting my data by surveying and interviewing the people who will be studied. So after all the data is collected, I will analyze the data according to the rate of incarceration, conviction, or just being charged, to the race association. So that's how I will compare the 2. So my first step will be to gather my research subjects, of course. I will provide them all with questionnaires that will reflect their interactions with the police, 1, 2, their drug use, 3, their time in prison, 4, their time in jail, any convictions, the amount of convictions, and what the conviction is for. Also, just simply being charged, so it may or may not have been thrown out in court, but we definitely want to include that in our information. So, my questions that will be provided on the survey will be taking on a quantitative approach. So these questions are easier to measure, and they're easier for the survey takers as well. They just have a better understanding with what or how questions. So I intend on taking that approach. And let's see, my research depends on hard statistics and quantifiable numbers. So the reason that I need quantifiable numbers are because I need to compare the rate of incarceration from the numbers that I received per age group to each race. So I will assign numeric values for easy objective measurements and comparison. So that when the data is analyzed, we can gauge between the 2. So I just want to say thank you for listening, and I hope that my research study provides a standard for further research into mass incarceration.